Claude Code allows you to pass an argument called dangerously skip permissions. And this avoids the need to approve every step when you're building or trying to fix something in a repo. On the downside, it can blow up your memory and cause your computer to crash, and it can delete files on your system. There are a few cases where it makes sense to run like this, but if you do, there are some precautions I'm going to go through in this video to explain how you might do it. I have to say I don't use YOLO all that much myself. I find that if I do, it often makes mistakes that I only find later on. I prefer generally to plan out using plan mode, shift tab, and then approve a lot before I might let it go and still approve small steps. And it's not so much about approving everything, but actually reviewing and being in the loop. Now, if I have something very well scoped, and if you're doing something maybe like Karpathy's auto research, where you've set up a task to optimize hyperparameters, you're just running one script, it's fairly clear what's being varied, then there's more of a case to be made for going into YOLO mode and letting the AI just go off and do things itself. I look as well at Peter Levels. He builds apps and he will use YOLO mode in order to fix bugs. And I think that can work well if the bugs are quite simple. But if you're trying to build an architecture where everything is consistent, right now at least, when it comes to using Claude Code, you probably need to be a bit in the loop. All of that said, let me describe how best, well, maybe not how best, but one of the ways that I use YOLO mode. First thing is I won't run it on my laptop. I'll run it on a VPS and I'll use Hetzner, which I found quite a bit cheaper than DigitalOcean. I'll run that droplet. I'll run Claude Code on it. So I'll SSH in. I'll even connect using Tailscale, which is a little bit more secure. I will run it using a non-root user. In fact, Claude Code won't allow you to run using the root user if you choose dangerously skip permissions. I will configure my Git identity so I can push up to a repo, but I won't give it access to all of my GitHub. I'll use a personal access token to give scope only to specific repos so that it can't damage. And I will protect the main branch on each of those repos. I'm just giving you an overview here, by the way. I'll go through it in detail then. I will use Tmux. This allows me to persist sessions. If you just run Claude Code on a VPS and you close down the terminal, it's going to kill the session. I want it to keep going and I want to be able to access via my phone or via my laptop. So I'll use Tmux, which gives you a persistent session that you can detach from without shutting it down. I will install a safety hook. There is a series of safety hooks that will basically add a little bit of text if you ever try to do things, or if the agent ever tries to do things like removing files, it will warn. And that warning is normally meant for humans, but it'll also be useful for the AI, and it can prevent cases of deleting files. I've already said what I do with scoping, just access to certain repos. And yeah, what else? Memory. So Claude Code actually takes up a good bit of memory. It can be particularly an issue when you run long conversations and when it starts calling sub-agents that do tool calls, you build up a ton of memory. And I have crashed VPSs doing this. And it can be pretty annoying if you crash the VPS, especially if you're not in root mode, because you have to go back into rescue mode and recover the server. So there are some precautions you can take. One is, and I'll do them in reverse, is to, well, make sure your server is big enough, ideally 4 gigabytes of RAM, first of all. You can optionally decide to limit how much RAM is being used by Claude Code. This is a bit more advanced using C groups. I explain it here. By the way, I'm at studio.trials.com/YOLO. But something more basic is maybe just to set up cleanup cron jobs. You can clean up the tool outputs without losing your conversation history. So this is something I'll often set up and get to run about every 6 hours or every day. Also, you can just use better session hygiene, as in don't run sessions for quite as long, restart sessions. And yeah, be aware that if you run a long session with sub-agents, it's likely to boost up the memory as well. You can also add swap. This means that if your RAM gets overloaded, it will use the disk, which will slow things down, but allow for some kind of boil over. So that's another way to manage memory. With all that said, let me just go through showing you how I do this. First thing, I'll go to Hetzner and I will create a server. I end up, if I want to be cheap, creating it in Helsinki because I can pick the cost optimized. So $2.99. And it looks like there's no availability on that one. So I'll have to pick the ARM64. Next, I've got my location. I'm going to run Ubuntu. And I'm going to set up an SSH key. Now, if you don't have an SSH key, this is what allows you to connect to the droplet. You'll need to have one on your phone if you're using something like Termius, which is what I use, or have one or both on your laptop as well. To create an SSH key, you can just run this command and you can create a key. This is on your Mac called Hetzner. Sorry, I keep calling it Hetzner sometimes. Just got that word Hertz in my head. This will create an SSH key called Hetzner. Let me go ahead. So I've set the one for my laptop, and also I've got one on my phone, which I generated through Termius. You can connect a volume. It's probably not a bad idea. I think there's 40 gigabytes by default on disk. If you create the volume, you do need to provide access to the volume to your non-root user. So keep that in mind. If you're using Tailscale, then you'll want to provide access to via UDP. So UDP port 41641. You can do that in the firewall settings, or I could select it here because I've done it previously for other droplets. And backups are probably not a terrible idea, because if you do run out of memory, you'll have to reboot it, which can be more annoying than just reinitializing from a backup. I'm going to call this YOLO, and I am going to try and buy the server. Let me see why it won't allow me to go ahead. Oh, there's no availability on that one, so I'll have to pick a regular performance one, unfortunately. Unless I can pick some other... Yeah, I can't. So it's going to be a little more expensive. And I'll create and buy. And here you can see already there's my public IP here, which I'm going to copy now. So I'm going to go over to my terminal, which is here. And I'm going to use Claude, which I've got installed on my Mac to help me out with the setup. I'm going to say add an add or replace an SSH config for this IP address. And I'll give it the little snippet that I want here. Note that I'm passing in my identity file, which is my SSH key. I'm just passing in the path here. So I've called it Hetzner. That's why I'm passing in this identity file. And I'm going to say, call it YOLO. And actually, I'm going to do something a bit more advanced, which will make more sense later. I'm going to say actually replace two configs, one for SSH root with no password. Well, actually, I don't need to say that. And one for the user Claude. So we'll connect to root with SSH, and I'll call it YOLO root, and to Claude with SSH YOLO, just SSH YOLO. And this will allow me to log in with root and then later log in with Claude, which will be a user that is not root. You have to do that if you want to run with dangerously skip permissions. So yeah, you can see it's creating the login for YOLO using the Claude user and the login for root using the root user. So I'm going to say yes. And then I'll say now test out connecting via root. And it should be able to connect. And if that works, I'm just going to myself connect in using root in a second. Yeah, so here, this is giving me an issue just because, yeah, I previously had a key by the same name. So it's removing the old key and it's retrying and it's working. So that's fine. And here, if I go SSH YOLO root, I should be able to connect in now to my droplet. I keep calling it droplet, but I guess they're just called VPSs on Hetzner. All right, I'm SSH'd in. Optionally, I could install Tailscale. I'd install it on my laptop. I would put both networks on the same tailnet, and then I'll be able to SSH in. Instead of putting the IP address of the droplet, I would put Tailscale's IP. Note that you do need to update the firewall to allow for that UDP. If you want to use Tailscale, so you'd have to go into the settings here, and you'd have to find firewalls, and then you'd have to make sure that you can allow Tailscale access. Then you can close down all the other ports if you're going via Tailscale. So it's just the Tailscale point of access. You've basically got your computer, your phone, Tailscale, and then you've got the VPS. And this is going to be a secure pathway. Right now, I'm just doing SSH direct in, which is also fairly fine. But Tailscale can kind of make it simpler and a bit more robust if you do want to add that extra layer. Okay, let's keep going. Next up is I'm going to create a non-root user. So I'm going to add a user, Claude, right here. Give it permissions for installing. I'll put the password for now just as YOLO. And put the password as YOLO. You can press enter through all of these. They're all old fields like room number. Gotta love that. So now I've got a user called Claude. And you can see I've switched to that user. Now, if I wanted to reconnect, so let's just say I exit here by pressing, how do I exit here? I guess I can just do exit. Yep. And now I can do SSH. And if I do SSH YOLO, this will connect to Claude directly. I do need to put in my password, which is YOLO. And now I'm connected. That's opposed to doing SSH YOLO-root, which is to connect to root. Okay, now we're going to install Claude Code. We're going to do it through Claude.ai with the curl request, which is the recommended way. And then we will resource bash rc. So let me paste this here. Sorry, it didn't work. Copy. And yeah, you can see here I am logged in as Claude, so that's good. It's going to install, and then it should resource, and all should be good. Now, when that's done, we're going to configure our Git identity. And then we're going to set up an alias, which is just going to make it faster if we want to run YOLO mode. What I may do first is install Tmux. I'll explain how that works. Then I'll maybe set up some aliases. We'll want to set up the safety hook as well. The safety hook can be done in two ways. If you have Node, you're able to run it via npx. But yeah, I guess I could install Node. It might be a quick way to do it. Otherwise, you can register it in Claude Code session settings just by creating the hook script and then running this here. I guess either should work actually. You do need to be a bit careful because this is going to set it up in root, and Claude right now I think is going to be installed for the Claude user. So I think I'll just go by this approach here and install npx. And so first install Node, and once that's installed, I'll install that hook. Once that's done, I'm going to install Tmux, and I'll explain how Tmux works. Basically, you create sessions with Tmux new-s and then the name. And yeah, you can attach to that session later by doing Tmux attach. You can detach by typing Tmux detach within the session or doing Control B and then pressing D. I'll show that in a moment. First, we will just make sure we have this hook configured. So here, it's going to add in the hook. Installing Claude Code templates. And the next thing we'll do is install Tmux. Now, by the way, at this point, what you could do is immediately run Claude and tell it go to studio.trelis.com and help me configure all of these things. That's definitely a way you could do it. But I'm going to do it manually just so you see a bit more. So we'll install Tmux. So here's how Tmux would work. It would be Tmux new-s, S for session. And I would say have a repo called YOLO test, something like this. So now I'm in a session, and then if I want to detach, I would just do Tmux detach. And if I want to attach, I would do Tmux attach -t YOLO test, and then I'm back in. So this is how you do persistent sessions. Also, it can be useful to create an alias. So I'll just do echo alias, and I'm going to call it YOLO test equals, and this is the command I want YOLO test to run, which is just to attach. And I'm going to direct that into my bash or C file. Got that wrong. wrongly. There we go. And I need to source this as well. So I need to reload. I typed that wrongly. Okay. And now what I can do is just run YOLO test and it should reattach. So yeah. By the way, Control B and then D detaches. So yeah, this is just a quick way for me to get back into a session if I've got a Tmux session going. Now let's go over to GitHub and create a repo that has got limited scopes. So what I'll do is I'll go to Trelis, Research, and I'll create a new repo here. So I will do repositories, new repository, and I'll put in YOLO test. I can keep it private and create repo. Now I want a personal access token. So I'll go to settings and go down to developer settings, and then I will create a fine grain token. And I need to have my mobile here, which is fine. So let me I need to go to my GitHub and type in 44. Okay. Now I'm going to do YOLO test, and I'll make the resource owner Trelis Research, and I only want to give it access to YOLO test like this. And the permissions I want to add will be just contents. You could add PR requests too, and I want it to be able to read and write, and I'll create this token. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just move this over so I can generate my token off the screen. I've got the token, and here I'm going to make a projects folder, move into the projects folder, and I will git clone, but first I'm going to create a .env, and I'm going to put in here GitHub PAT, and I'll just put in the value there off screen. And the other one I'm going to put in is Trelis_studio. You could here put in some other spend limited API key like OpenRouter, for example. I'm going to do a demo using Trelis Studio. So I've got an account here on Trelis Studio. In settings, I've attached a Hugging Face token, which is required to be able to push datasets. Optionally, you can add weights and biases keys or Trelis Router API key if you want access to different private models for doing evaluations, for example. And I'm going to create a new key here. I'll call it YOLO test, and I'll just put a spend limit of, let's just say 100. Important to use spend limited keys because when you YOLO, it's very likely you spend all of your allowance. And I've pasted that into the environment variables file on the droplet. And now I think we should be in good shape. I'm going to move that back across. Okay, so I've basically entered those environment variables, and we're getting close now to a point where we're going to use Claude. In fact, I'm going to start up Claude first. Yeah, I guess I'm revealing my API key there. I'll cancel it later. Yeah, so I'm going to run Claude, but first I'm going to create one other handy command, which is going to be the YOLO alias. And all this will do is it will mean if I type YOLO, it'll do Claude dangerously run permissions. So this is a handy one to have. And now that I'm in projects, I could start a Tmux session. I guess I will just, I'll do YOLO test, which starts a Tmux session, and then I'll just do YOLO. And I guess YOLO doesn't look like it's been set here. Let's test if YOLO works here. Oh yeah, it's just YOLO. It's not YOLO test. So let's just X out of that, YOLO test, and then YOLO. And I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I guess this was created before I had set up the alias. So I think I needed to resource, and now YOLO works. So I go to dark. I'll continue with the subscription. This is sometimes a bit annoying. Okay, so I've copied the code. I've pasted the code. And I should be logged in. And now I'm getting this extra permission step here, which is saying I'm in the bypass permissions mode, which I need to accept. And now we're in YOLO, we're in Tmux, and we're ready to do some coding. I think I've installed everything at this point, and I just need to git clone. So I'm going to say git clone into projects, the Trelis research YOLO test folder, please. And when that's done, what I'm going to do is, add in my Git username. So I don't think I'll do it now because I'm not going to be pushing, but if I wanted to push, I would do this. Also, within GitHub, I would turn on protection in settings. So I'd go to the repo and turn on protections for the main branch, which means that non-admins can't push or merge. Now, I am an admin as I've set it up, so that wouldn't provide a whole lot of protection. But what I could do is create another GitHub username and use that. Or I could limit the scopes, make sure the scopes are limited on that personal access token so that I can't actually merge or push in. Now, the reason this is not working is because I need to tell it first update the Claude MD file for this user to indicate that there's a GitHub PAT in the projects.env file and also a Trelis Studio API key that can be used for training and evaluating TTS and ASR models, and indicate to use studio.com and fetch open API docs if doing any work with voice models. Yeah, so it's a good idea to at least update. There's always a Claude MD file within a repo, and then there's one in root. The one in root is the one that you want to have general instructions in. So what I'm doing here is I'm making available these environment variables for all of the projects that I'm running, not just this specific one. So now that that's done, now clone the YOLO test repo. And I guess I could also say this, also set my git config for Ronin plus bot at trelis.com. And it is an empty repo because we just created it. I'll set up my git config. Now, typically what I would do is I would start some kind of a job. So what I can consider is going to Hugging Face. There's a data set, Ronin medium. I've got this private data set with about 400 rows of voice. I could train a TTS. I might just instead actually use a public data set and train an ASR model. So I'm going to say, okay, great. Now, very briefly, plan out how we'll train. What ASR model will I train? Let's say a Parakeet ASR model on Studio using this data set, which has train and actually that's the wrong one. So I want this data set here, which I believe has a train and a test set. Train and validation. Val. Okay. Now, I typically like to plan this out even if I'm skipping permissions, but you could decide for it to just one-shot it and let it go. You could detach. The way to detach here is to do Control B and then D, and then again run YOLO test, which is our alias for reattaching. So you can see that it's all still running here. So right now it's getting the API docs for Studio, and it's going to start to set up training. So we should be in good shape there. Now, so it's listing the Parakeet models, train, monitor. Yes, let's do that. Yes, do that. And when done, point me to the results. Okay, what else? the last thing, which I haven't showed you, is just setting up some of these memory limits here. So possibly I could decide to set up the most basic one, which is setting up some cleanup jobs. So for example, if I SSH in here, SSH YOLO test, sorry, just YOLO, and here I can just set up some cron jobs to clean up this per studio.trelis.com YOLO. And we'll see if this works. It may not work because of permissions, in which case I'll need to reconnect using root. Yeah, you see the hook that's blocking the RF there. And yeah, now we've got these cron jobs. So you can see we've set this up now. Now, if you're interested, you can check on Trelis Studio. If you go to training to ASR, you should see that we're training a Parakeet model. So it looks like it's training. It's just done the evaluation and it's moving into running the training. And when that's all done, it should report out with the results. And I could decide as well to train an ASR model. Sorry, I'm training ASR. I could train TTS, but this is going to check. And it should get everything done. I could say something like, when all done, file feedback via Studio API regarding any issues faced. Parakeet is a new model we've just added, by the way. I probably should have picked an earlier model. It's more likely to hit a few bugs. So yeah, you can file via API some feedback, which would appear here in bugs. So I'm going to have it file feedback with any issues faced, and then create a report and push that up to the repo. Now there's one other thing I can do here on the Claude file. Find the user's Claude file and add a note to never push or merge to main, but to work on other branches instead. So this is another way that you can protect that. And with that, I think I've covered most. Yeah, you can see here it's adding in guidance to Claude. I think I've covered most of what I want to here. The training is ongoing. You can see the loss is printing, the time elapsed is printing. And yeah, I'll just let this run. It's this one here is not using skip permissions. I can easily detach Control-B-D and let it go and see what happens. So that's pretty much the overview of running YOLO. You can find everything over at studio.trelis.com/YOLO. I will go through a video in much more detail around voice specifically, but I wanted to make this because it's relevant more generally if you're just trying to run with skipping permissions. As per usual, let me know of any questions below in the comments. Cheers, folks.